When I'm looking for a pocket everyday carry kind of camera, I'm looking for something that still shoots like a professional camera, has professional features, high quality glass, and manual controls. And also I want it on the cheap in case I drop it or lose it or whatever. I'm not afraid to look at older cameras either. It doesn't have to be the latest and greatest. And I think I found just about everything I want in this camera from 2008. It's not perfect. I have some big caveats, but it's pretty close. If you've just stumbled into this video somehow, chances are that you didn't even know that Ricoh is a camera brand. And that's okay, they're not very well known. They've actually been around since the film days for a long time. But they are growing in popularity, but still only among a niche of photographers. They're known for their pocket cameras, like this one we're going to talk about today. Their most popular series is the GR series, which I love, and they really are the best, but they are very expensive. Even these older ones are hundreds of dollars. $400, $500 for the cheapest camera. So consider this camera, the GX200, a cheaper alternative that's still very good and has most of the same professional features. This camera is a compact camera, 12 megapixel CCD sensor with a 24-72 equivalent zoom lens. More on that lens in a minute. The original review on DP Review was split. On the one hand, under good conditions, this camera performs really well, outstanding even. But out of those ideal circumstances, the camera is, and I quote, "at best unremarkable and at worst awful." So with that, let's dive into this controversial camera. The GX200 actually has an impressive set of features. For starters, the body has full manual controls for changing shutter speed, aperture, ISO, metering modes, and more. All the stuff photographers really care about. And better yet, the camera has actual physical controls to do all those things. It has a front dial and even this rear multi-function dial among some other buttons. But how many compact cameras do you know have a front dial like a DSLR or mirrorless camera would? Not very many. And it has the standard set of features that you'd expect out of a pro camera, like it can shoot RAW, which I really recommend on this camera. The JPEGs can be nice, especially the black and white JPEGs, but to get the most, definitely shoot RAW. A unique feature that will only be helpful to a select few, but is worth noting, is that this has the ability to shoot cropped RAW files. So the native aspect ratio of this sensor is 4:3, but it can also shoot 3:2 in RAW and 1:1 in RAW, which is interesting. Not many cameras can do that. When you set up that profile, it's actually just shooting the whole RAW, and you open it in Lightroom and it has the whole RAW file. But this will actually save the RAW file as 1:1. I don't know who that's particularly useful for, but it is cool. The images get noisy real fast on this camera. And that's one of the most common complaints, actually, if you look up the GX200. Basically, if you can shoot in good light and at low ISO levels, then you're fine, like DP Review said. But in low light and higher ISO settings, it can get mushy. But hear me out. Sometimes it's not all bad. To me, the lens on this camera is a big deal. It's not perfect, but what it's good at, it's really good at. On the wide end of the lens, it's a 24mm equivalent, which, if you don't know, is much less common than the more 28mm wide end equivalent on most compact cameras. And I really like the noticeable difference in that wider field of view. Especially if you're a photographer nowadays getting into older cameras, coming from a smartphone, you're used to that much wider field of view, and 28mm is just going to feel kind of restrictive. But you don't have that here. And even if you're not coming from a smartphone, I just think there's a lot more you can do with 24mm than 28. There is a wide angle attachment you could buy if you're interested to knock it down to about a 19mm equivalent. And I'm sure it's great based on my experience with Ricoh lens adapters that I use with my GR series. But to me, it just defeats the purpose of an everyday camera, which slips into even the tiniest of pockets. So I didn't end up picking one up. The lens can also just be really lovely in how it renders scenes. I found it more than adequately sharp wide open, which is really nice, so you can let as much light in as possible and not really have to worry about sharpness. And at some apertures, it's quite sharp. Another neat feature is that it has sensor stabilization, which is handy for keeping your shots looking nice and stable without shake at those lower shutter speeds. The lens also does have a macro feature, which lets you get pretty close into your subjects. And the camera also has this cute little pop-up flash, which works great in these types of shots as well. And you'll also notice up at the top the hot shoe. And this is unusual for compact cameras, especially this tiny. It's usually reserved for really high-end models. Not only can you attach larger or even wireless flashes here, you can also add an optional electronic viewfinder attachment. Now, I don't have that viewfinder. I find it a little pricey for what this camera is, and I really wanted to know if I loved the camera before investing in something like that. And once again, it makes it less pocketable. I do like OVS a lot, and I do like EVS looking through a viewfinder when framing my shots. But when I have a compact camera, I just shoot differently than I do with a larger camera. So honestly, to me, it really does not bother me. You've probably noticed looking at my B-roll that there's some physical problems with my copy. And that's because I only paid 34 bucks for it. Everything was working on the camera, but the listing did say that the screen had some problems. Since then, things have only gotten worse. The screen continues to deteriorate and I can see less and less on it. And now the lens has developed an issue where I can't focus at certain focal lengths. It just hunts. So I can only focus kind of more towards the tele end or more towards the wide end, and somewhere in the middle it loses it. But all the pictures you've seen have been with those constraints and they've turned out pretty good. So it is a good little camera. But let's say that your camera doesn't suffer from those particular physical issues, which hopefully it does not. This might not be the best Ricoh camera they've ever made. I'm not going to say that it is, but for around $100, it might be the best value Ricoh you can buy because it has all the professional features of a much higher level, much more expensive, 4 or 5 times more expensive GR series camera. Has all the physical controls, a pretty good lens, not up to par with this lens, but still really good, but for way cheaper. Perhaps a happy medium between these two, both in price and features and quality, is the Ricoh GR Digital series. So let me know if I should try that out. Thank you for watching. Go out there and shoot with whatever camera you have right now. Have fun with it. And until next time, happy snapping.